Hi, today I want to introduce you my new component called Not Enough Logic Functions. This component is a set of logical functions. It's simple text component, but it has a very wide range of uses. If we take a look at its properties, we can see four areas. Let's start in order. In first area there is a color in which our text will be painted, and two type of actions. First type is click action. With that action, text component will act like a button. But second one is more interesting and complicated. Let's talk about it a bit later. Next one area called if. In that area is implemented the main component logic. Here we have four inputs, four variables, two comparison functions, and one logical function. At the bottom we have if output property. Component will show this text only if all conditions are met. The main component purpose is to implement the branching functions into ADALO. To implement the branching functions, we have our next one area called else. It's disabled by default. In that case, if all the conditions are met, component will show text from if output, but if they aren't, it will show nothing. But you can enable else area and it will show text from else. Last one area is called visible. It has no inputs, just toggle. If it's enabled, text will show, otherwise it won't. This area works with moment actions. I will talk about them a bit later. The principle of operation of the component and its possibilities I will show today in four screens. Let's take a look at our first screen. If you have ever worked with any programming language, then you can imagine approximately what is happening here. Here we have that if area in which we input all the needed variables. Here we have both of our comparison functions and the logical functions between them. Next there is a text label which we will show after all conditions are met. At the bottom we have else label. And finally we have our component which will show the text. By default, as you can see, it shows if output. Moreover, if you haven't changed second function block and logic function, you can use component as simple branching, with only two variables and comparison function. These two comparison functions and logic functions you can change to any of the functions which are in the list. First comparison function is true only if first variable is greater than or equals to second. Let's try to enter something. 5 is greater than 4. True. Next we have logical function OR, which means that if area will be true if at least one of the logic blocks will be true. Now it's true, only because first block is true. Second block right now is false. Let's try to enter 3. As you can see, output changed. Now it shows else. Let's try to fill now second block. 5 and 3. It immediately changed to if, because second block became true. Now let's talk about values in comparison and logic functions. First and second comparison functions have the same values in list, so we have choice between comparisons equals, not equals, greater than or equals, less than, and less than or equals. Here we have exact values. In logic functions list we have 6 functions. They are AND, OR, NAND, NOR, XOR, and XNOR. In second screen we have 2 counters and 2 are text components. Text will show only if conditions are met. As you can see, first text will show only if first counter will be greater than or equals to 10, and second will equal to 5. Second text will show only if first counter won't equal to 7, and second will be less than 5. Let's try to make first component visible. We have to make first counter at least 10 and second make equal to 5. Now as you can see, first text showed. What we need to do to make second component hide? We have to make both blocks false. So we need to set first counter to 7 and our component will hide because second block was already false. If we decrease second counter, second text will show, wherein first hides. How it's implemented? As you can see, else block is disabled, so if conditions aren't met, text won't show. In first variable we input counters value and set comparison functions to greater than or equals. Second variable we set to 10. Between them we have AND function, so both of the blocks have to be true. In second block I also input counter value, set comparison function to equals, and write in second variable 5. Only in that case our text component will show that text. In second component, else area disabled as well. In if area in logic function we have NAND. NAND is true only if both blocks are false, so we just invert what we wrote in here. We set first variable equals to 7 and second greater or equals to 5, and when the conditions are inverted, function will be true. In the third screen, I want to show that component can compare not only integers and fractional numbers, but also strings. More, it can compare string lengths with numbers. How does it work? If both inputs are strings and comparison function is set to equals or not equals, it will compare content of the string. If comparison function is inequality or we compare string with number, component will compare only string length. Here we have two text components. In first component, comparison function is greater than, so it will compare string lengths. In second, comparison function is equals, so if there are two strings, it will compare their content. Let's try to enter something. First text changed. Now it tells us that first string length is greater than second. If we decreased first input, text changes and tells us now that first string is greater than or equals to second. Second component won't change, because content doesn't match. If we try to enter to both inputs same text, component changes and now tells us that strings are equal. If we try to enter F in first input and D in second, component will show that strings aren't equal. Now let's try to compare string and number. First component changes. Now it tells us that first string is greater than second. But if we input here 5, text changes again and tells us now that first input is less than or equals to second. In that case, else area is enabled in both components because we need to show two possible situations. But I haven't used logic and second comparison functions because we don't need them. As you can see, by default logic function is AND, and comparison function is equals, so it will be true, and you don't have to worry about second block. And as we have here AND function, if first block will be true, the whole component will be true. In variables, we just input the values of the input components and set function greater than. In second component, we have same situation. Else area is enabled and second block isn't used, but in second component we set here comparison function equals. Fourth screen is about the most interesting and uncommon property of this component. At first, in user's database, we have property called ADALO. And this input in fourth screen is sometimes visible, and it will show only when ADALO property is equal to 1. With this screen I want to talk about the fact that component can be used not only as text but also as global logical function element. It's implemented by combining such things as moment actions and disabled visible property. While visible area is disabled, text won't be shown, but it will work with its internal logic. Moment actions work as native screen actions, which are happening after user enters the screen, but as you know, you can't implement any of the logic functions in screen actions. For example, we have to show that input only if ADALO property is 1. I've also created two number properties in user's collection. Those are reputation and days active. With this component, user can see and use the input only if his reputation is greater than 10, or he's been active 3 or more days. If conditions are met, we use if output. There we have number 1, but if they aren't met, in else output there is number 0. What does moment action is simple updates current user's ADALO property and puts their actual output, doesn't matter what it will be, if output or else. For that we have in magic text access to two properties. There we have two values. They are actually the same, but one is for text values and second is for numbers. For example, in number property we can input only number output. When user enters the screen inside of the logic component, all needed actions are performed. Because of disabled visible property, they doesn't show, but they immediately go to moment action. Screen updates, and if output was 1, user now will be able to see and interact with this input. If we take a look at current user right now, we will see that user's reputation is only 2, so first logic block won't work. But user's active days are 4, it means that second block will be true, and as we have logic OR function, the whole component will output 1. And moment action will write that number 1 in ADALO property. Let's try it. Transition to the fourth screen is made by that next button. Nothing was visible, but that logic function worked, and text input showed. Why did it show? It's all because in current user's ADALO property was written number 1, and the input immediately showed. All that I told and showed you today is just a tiny part of what can be made with this component. All depends on your creativity. I hope that this review was useful and you can make a lot of interesting things with that component.